those of you who have been sleep deprived enough to hallucinate, what was it like? Story 1. In college, I tried to hold down a donut delivery job while taking a full credit load. I got up at 4:30 a.m. to deliver, and often was up until midnight or even later. After a particularly busy week with almost no sleep, I hallucinated a man crossing the street right in front of me while delivering, and I slammed on my brakes to avoid hitting him. When I realized that there was no one in the crosswalk, and no one anywhere in sight, I finished my deliveries and immediately quit my job. Story 2. I once spent 3 days without sleep. By the third day everything was in soft focus. Colors were wrong and I was hearing voices whispering my name. I do not recommend it. Story 3. I had a meth problem several years ago. I think my longest stretch was 4 days. Past a certain point you just don't know which way is up. Sure, meth can make you weird, but in my experience I think the sleep deprivation is actually what makes you lose your marbles after long enough. When I made sure I slept and ate regularly, it was almost like an energy drink, but when I binged and had my junky weeks, oof, once I thought I was hearing music playing loudly somewhere outside. I was convinced it was a soundtrack to a big music festival I had attended a few weeks before that someone had also attended, and was now playing loudly in the middle of the night. The whole music festival, multiple bands had a soundtrack. Bruh, I couldn't hear it when I listened for it, but while distracted I could plainly hear it. Dead of the night and no music was playing. Another time I was sketching in my room at like 3 a.m. I had a friend over who was just chilling with me, asking questions every so often that would lead to discussions. Slowly they responded less and less until I looked at them and they were just looking at me. Asked what was wrong, looked down, looked up waiting for the answer, and they were gone, never there. They hadn't talked to me in months after they found out I was using so many shadow people, and those took a long time to go away after sobering up. Whispers, hearing someone talking to me, my name being called, hearing someone talking about me. Even though I was by myself, sometimes I'd be driving and cars would suddenly be coming straight at me, lights blinding and everything, only to sort of come to and realize I'm driving on a back road and am the only car for miles. By no means am I saying any weird mental had nothing to do with the meth. But in my experience, not sleeping for days had a much more horrifying effect. Story 4. When Need for Speed Underground 2 came out on PS2, I stayed up for 3 days. Aside from being extremely tired and vision hearing being very impaired, everything was mostly normal, until I woke up standing inside Subway probably 10 miles away with no memory of how I got there. I guess I was hungry. Story 5. Very calm as far as hallucinations go. I had driven for 20 hours and was in the Arizona-California desert. It was the middle of the night. It had been dark for hours and only other car lights and stars were visible. Started seeing things out of the corner of my eyes, just kind of objects off a distance on the side of the road. Then it was things in the road ahead that got my attention. After a bit I started seeing fantastic meteorite showers in the sky. Wasn't scary or anything. Didn't stop driving to be young, dumb, and invincible again. Story 6. It was the weirdest thing. I was taking notes on an extremely boring video in theology, but then words started appearing on their own without me writing anything. They were dancing around for a bit, and I found it completely normal for a bit, but then I realized that words aren't supposed to dance. Then I snapped back to reality with nothing on my paper. Story 7. I have exploding head syndrome, and when I'm really tired sometimes I can see the sounds I hear, if that makes sense. Story 8. When I was in university, immediately after my father died on Christmas Eve after I threw him out, I pretty much quit sleeping, maybe 3 to 4 hours a night, went through lots of counseling, lots of medication, 7 different sedatives and SSRIs, but basically just couldn't sleep. We had a home birth for my niece, so even when the grief wasn't overwhelming, the newborn baby kept me up. Anyways, I knew it got bad when I started microsleeping. I'd be in class listening to a lecture, blink and police officers would be standing beside me explaining what had transpired, then blink and I'd be back listening to class. Maybe mentally be out of it for 5 to 10 seconds but felt entirely lucid other than time dilation. The psychiatrist at the time said I was dropping into REM because I was so sleep deprived. Happens with new moms when babies are cluster feeding. I wasn't driving or anything, so not dangerous that way, but honestly lived in a fog for years. Just like snap of the finger. Perfectly lucid, horrible moment of my life. Snap of the finger back. During this period I had a thing where I quit talking to people at school to see how long they would go without chatting to me. Literally had week stretches where not a word was said. Then came finals. Started vomiting with anxiety when I tried to enter the exam rooms, which was an auto-fail for my classes. So academic probation, the opportunity to protest if I would speak in front of the university senate, which I clearly couldn't do, and eventual complete failure. There were times where I was hitting the student food bank after hours because I literally couldn't walk into a grocery store because my anxiety was so severe. So definitely can happen, but for me was pretty extreme situation. Story 9. I sat down on the couch at 6:59 p.m. not sure if I should go to bed then after not sleeping at all the night before or try and force myself to stay up another few hours so that I wouldn't wake up too early the next day and throw off my whole sleep cycle. Well, I felt like I couldn't even force my eyes open another minute. The next thing I know I am waking up and it feels like it is the middle of the night and I am wide awake and mad at myself for letting myself fall asleep that early and throwing off my whole sleep cycle, but it is what it is now. I get up and go to make myself some tea and the time on the stove catches my eye and it says 700. So I assume it is 7 a.m. and I must have slept a lot longer than I thought and I didn't throw my sleep cycle off after all, but then I see it is kind of dark out, so I look at my calendar on my phone. It is 7 p.m. on the same day I sat on the couch. Literally only 60 seconds had passed since I sat down and contemplated trying to keep myself awake. Still can't figure out how it happened. Story 10. It's a common occurrence for me. Nothing too out there, though, usually just visual aberrations, like constantly seeing shadows moving in my peripheral vision, mistaking random objects for completely different objects, etc., plus occasional auditory disturbances along with a typical sense of displacement. Once or twice I had instances where familiar people were complete strangers, no recognition whatsoever. That was pretty trippy and more than a little terrifying. Story 11. For context, this happened during some military training, laying down in the woods desperately trying to stay awake. Usually the plants turn into people, like you'll see a figure walking around out in front of you, and then come to and realize it was just a sapling or a bush or something. Happened surprisingly more during the day than the night. Story 12. It's honestly scary. Like one time I was on the verge of falling asleep and I thought I felt somebody run their finger across my cheek. When I snapped upright into a sitting position, nobody was there. I live alone, by the way. I'm sure I hallucinated it, but that is scary regardless. Story 13. I used to have episodes of insomnia as a teenager. Once, while walking home from school, I saw a car driving in my direction. It suddenly veered onto the sidewalk, continued toward me, and swerved back onto the road moments before hitting me. I thought it was real, but I was so out of it from exhaustion that I didn't even flinch. I realized a few days later that the curb of the sidewalk was too high for a car to have possibly driven over. Story 14. Scary enough, it always happens while driving. I wouldn't say I'm hallucinating so much as dreaming with my eyes open. The darkness begins to creep in from the side until you're somewhere else for what feels like you've always been there, then you feel your eyes open and bam, adrenaline. Only lasts for a moment until the same darkness begins creeping from the side again, and you're doing everything you can to keep your eyes open, but keeping them open doesn't help. Story 15. When I had a new baby, I was in Target with the baby and got a call from an officer. Turns out I had left every single door of my car open. He thought it was a break-in. It was not, just me sleep deprived. Story 16. I was in Costa Rica patrolling the beaches every night to find sea turtles laying their eggs. It was an eco-vacation thing, so during the day we would be up and exploring the area. I don't know how they expected people to function on like 3 hours of sleep for a week, but we did it. I mostly remember super irrational thoughts. Thinking animal noises were people talking, thinking monkeys were dogs up in the trees, but the hallucinations were crazy. I'm not sure if the beach really was glowing some, or if I was making all of it up, but my mind was making crazy glowing patterns in the sand. I thought the glowing stuff was also biting me. Really, it was sand fleas. We would stop and take a break mid-patrol. I'd lay down to rest and think I was still walking, then wake up and keep walking. I got really confused as to when I was awake. Never saw a sea turtle. Story 17. Used to overwork myself to the point of hallucinations fairly regularly. Most were auditory. I'd hear someone talking nearby, usually saying my name or just a couple of muffled syllables. Bits of songs like having an earworm except louder. Oh, a distant ringing telephone was also common. Less commonly I'd hear something loudly falling somewhere. Visually, I'd mostly see flashes of color or blackness in the periphery of my vision. Like when someone walks by and you just barely see them out of the corner of your eye. Tall figures in the room such as a coat on a rack would also briefly appear to be a person standing there. Those were probably the most startling to me. Story 18. University student. During finals week my freshman year I forgot to take off work and ended up having to work from like 4 to 10 p.m. Get off, go to the library till like 5 to 6 a.m. My lib is open 24 hours. Wake up, take the final at 8, and just study more until I had work next. I remember when I'd get back to my dorm room around 5:30 it'd be completely dark, and I'd be seeing the craziest colors. I've dabbled psychedelics a little, and it's literally just like that, like a small 10-minute acid trip before I'd completely out. Might get a brain tumor by age 40, but hey, absolutely killed my finals that year. Never had audio hallucinations like the rest of these comments say though. Story 19. Chronic insomniac here. I have lots of stories, especially sleep paralysis, that happened twice. I legit thought I was dying when the hooded man without a face hovered next to my bed. I also woke up one morning after a restless night to see a girl standing by my bed in a white nightgown. I shrugged it off and rolled over. It wasn't until I woke up later that I realized what happened. I did a major cleanse that night and never saw her in my apartment again. This was years ago. Story 20. Over one summer in high school, my friends and I stayed awake for a few days playing Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs. We had tons of sugar and caffeine to help us play through the pain. I was laying on the couch staring at the ceiling and I saw a leprechaun, may have been a gnome. Hard to tell from that distance, walk into view standing on the ceiling. He looked down at me, smiled and doffed his hat to me, and started to dance a jig. I said to myself, oh no, and buried my head in the pillow until I fell asleep. Back when I was younger my whole family left to France. It's literally thousands of km away. I was home alone for a month. I've never been scared of being home alone and I knew I can do everything by myself. I'm in a wheelchair so it could be an issue for most and I could always call my neighbors etc. But for some reason I just couldn't sleep. Always been a night owl kind of person anyways though. So in all these 30 days I slept maybe 1-4 h a day maximum. Oftentimes staying up for days. A friend of mine I Skyped with once said I fell asleep with my eyes open. When it comes to hallucinations, I'm pretty sure I saw my walls moving kind of like waves. When looking around, everything seemed to be moving in a weird way. It was too realistic, but I knew it isn't real. Nothing bad ever happened though. I was fine, and as soon as my family got back, I was able to sleep properly too. Story 21. 3 days without sleep. I started to answer questions out loud that I was hearing in my head. My husband took our newborn downstairs so I could sleep. Story 22. Shadows creeping up the walls, but it's complete blackness and tendrils consuming everything, or skittering shadows in my peripheral that look like people, animals, or bugs moving, whispering, talking, or worse, singing. Sometimes I'll hear what sounds like music playing, and when I try to figure out where it comes from, it disappears. So I go back to whatever I was doing, and then I'll start hearing children singing or people talking, footsteps, or a door closing. I get this from insomnia, before I have a seizure, or if I get too overwhelmed or overtaxed. Story 23. I had a terrible cough, so bad that I coughed myself awake and ended up staying awake for days on end. At the end of it, I was hallucinating there's something in the kitchen, repeating that over and over again. I had a sense of impending doom, like there was some sort of overwhelming thing increasingly progressing towards some tipping point, where something terrible was going to happen. It's hard to really convey, but it was terrifying. Story 24. This happened to me once when I was driving home late at night. I know looking back I should have pulled over. I was driving down a country road and thought I saw a giant brick wall blocking the road, so I slammed on the brakes. This woke me up immediately, and when I looked at the road again, the wall was gone and realized I had hallucinated it. Moral of the story is, if you ever feel yourself falling asleep behind the wheel, don't try to tough it out. You should pull over and walk around a bit to wake yourself up. Story 25. I usually just see a fly on the wall fly away, but it not be anywhere in the room when I looked around. Also someone calling my name that wasn't there. Story 26. I once went 4 days and 3 nights without sleep. I didn't see anything that wasn't there, but my view of the world was strange. I thought the staircase was moving, and I heard a lot of noises and voices that weren't really there. They were mostly memories that were recreating themselves because my brain wasn't firing properly. I felt like a ghost version of myself that was only mostly there. I forgot to mention my cat. I have a cat, and I would randomly step over her while I was walking. Except that she wasn't there. I'd feel her jump in my lap and I'd go to pet her. No cat. This was pretty constant on day 4. Story 27. I stayed awake for 3 days, or in other words 2 consecutive nights without sleep. I was feeling too sleepy when bored but too awake when excited. Bodily sensations messed up. Sometimes more, other times less. Sense of hearing reduced, but it was cool. Distant sounds were moped, vocals were loud. Vision became less saturated, everything looked boring. I don't know if it's hallucination. I could no longer differentiate between daydream imagination and real dream. Often felt disconnected from real world, but nothing too extreme like seeing visuals or hearing voices. Story 28. Oh cool. Finally one I can reply to. I have an insane imagination, thanks to having Asperger's syndrome and ADHD, so it's pretty hard to imagine what insane stuff I see as a hallucination. I once went 3 days without sleep, and I began hallucinating. The easiest way to put it is to think of ants walking in straight lines on the floor and up walls and on the roof, making grids like in an early test of a video game, where nothing has texture, and then to feel all of the ants' individual footsteps. Edit. I've seen some people commenting about hearing voices, just realized I did as well. It was like hearing conversations behind me and not being able to make out what they're saying. Story 29. Every time this happens to me, I always see flying cows, every single time, and the cows are funky colors too, like purple, blue, or green. They are always jumping over white puffy clouds. I don't have any auditory things, just the... Story 30. I usually become manic after staying up for 24 hours. Longest I stayed up for was 4 days straight. I was extremely manic and definitely not there lucidly. Story 31. I'll frequently think someone is calling my name, or saying something to me. I'll also typically hear and partially see things as if I'm living out a dream. Once when I was sleep deprived, I was writing something down, looked up, and I saw the wall in front of me, but I also saw strobe lights, shadows running around, and I heard voices and Celine Dion singing. When I looked back down at my page, it was covered in scribbles I didn't remember making. Really weird. I also thought I saw a cow in my backyard once. Story 32. Once had to stay awake 3 days straight to finish an engineering assignment. Didn't hallucinate exactly, but I felt absurdly delicate, like I would just keep going, then shatter like glass. Nothing felt real. Closest to hallucination was seeing colors in the dark, like static, but multicolored. Story 33. Oh my god, hey, race my story, finally. So I was extremely tired because I had flown from Mumbai, India to Newark, New Jersey to St. Pete, Florida college study abroad. So that's a 15-hour flight and a middle seat in the back, a 3-hour wait in New Jersey, and then another 2-hour flight. So basically I hadn't had any real sleep in like 48 hours on top of traveling and schlepping bags around the entire time. I was exhausted. I got to the house I lived in at the time with roommates, and one of my roommates was having a study group. I quickly said hello and that I immediately need to sleep so I won't be bothering their study group, and that I was so tired I would be unbothered by noise. I fell asleep in like 3 seconds after curling up in bed. About 2 hours later, my roommate tries to wake me to ask me if I would want pizza ID they ordered. That's when I started to hallucinate. I thought the entire study group was in the room yelling at me. They left shortly after I went to sleep. I then hallucinated that my roommate wanted me to give a speech to her class because they were mad I went to sleep. I tried to tell my roommate I was too tired to write a speech and that I didn't understand why they were mad. My roommate quickly realized I was losing my and had me just go to sleep. She tucked me back in and about 10 minutes later I woke up feeling like I had the best night's sleep I've ever had. It was super weird and my roommates and I had a good laugh about it later. Story 34 literally happened last week. For me, I was saying something to my friends but they didn't respond because I never said it. My brain made me think I said it, but in reality I just made an entire conversation between the three of us while the other two were talking. Happened 3 times before I actually was able to say something out loud. Story 35 reading these is making my tinnitus act up badly. Like every comment about an audible hallucination, and I hear ringing in my ears edit, okay, the government is watching me. I got an email for tinnitus medication. I've never had it officially diagnosed, never told my doctor I have it, just my parents who work in the medical field and unofficially diagnosed it. What the? Story 36 for me. People kind of stuttered like a scratched DVD, and then they were suddenly doing things that they were not in real life, then they would stutter again and snap back into place wherever they actually were. Everything was in real time and I heard everything that was actually happening around me, so the disconnect of what I was hearing versus what I saw was really confusing and freaky. Story 37 was in the military and we were doing an exercise which included sleep deprivation for about a week. Day 3 moving through the bush and I swear every little shrub was a Bulbasaur. Story 38 after 4 days with no sleep, I stood in front of the mirror in my bathroom and tried to pull all of my hair out because a voice told me it would make me fall asleep. I tugged as hard as I could on handfuls of hair and it didn't work. Sleep is important. Story 39 horrifying. The hallucinations whispers or visible ones feel super realistic. Whispers are like someone is actually 2 inches away from your ear and the visions are quite blurry for me, at least extremely scary. I have to say keeps me awake like a nightmare. Story 40 felt a lot like dreaming honestly. I'd be talking to someone then all of a sudden be snapped out of it and realized they couldn't possibly have been there, and it happened over and over when my mind started to put its guard back down. Lots of hearing voices behind me or from another room when my brain was reminding me I shouldn't be seeing them, yet was still tricked into hearing them. Culminated in a seizure eventually. Story 41 I have insomnia, and before I started taking sleep medication I was getting about 10 hours of sleep a week. At school I would hear people talking behind me, turn around and no one was there, I only a one visual one, but it was very minor. I saw this tree in campus that IRL is covered in graffiti, but I saw it clean. Story 42 I drive trains, railroad work is on call, and so lack of sleep is just a normal part of life. I got 5 hours of sleep in the past 56 hours, not even that tired. Auditory hallucinations are mostly murmuring noise in the background. Like a radio on in the next room but only loud enough to occasionally know that it is on, but not understand it. Sometimes other noises happen, but since your brain is really only hearing what it expects to hear, it all feels normal. Same with visuals. Usually it is a narrowing of visual perception field. The edges of your vision start to get easier to ignore and the brain starts filling in those gaps with what it expects to see. If you see something that isn't there, it is because you thought something was there, so, unless something makes you realize your mistake, you don't know it was an hallucination. For me, it is usually reaching for something just at the periphery of my vision like keys or a drink only to find it isn't there, but several feet away instead. I have developed a very deliberate visual acknowledgement where I look directly at things I need to see when tired, even look 2 or 3 times just to be sure. Like double-checking before backing up, it in everything you do. I used to work with guys who would talk about track people, hallucinations of people standing in the middle of the track, just at the edge of the light which is really far away. Engine lights are extremely bright. I am talking in the middle of nowhere, they just never get any closer. I guess I never expected to see them so I haven't experienced it. Back in the 80s, the circus train Barnum Bailey derailed, and the elephant escaped. A passing train hit the elephant, which derailed them too. When they called the radio dispatch to report we just hit an elephant, the dispatcher didn't miss a beat asking what color was it going to an amusement park with my wife and kids after being up for 72 hours straight was actually kind of fun. Edit 5 minutes after typing this, as I was getting ready for bed, I got called to work. Currently I am at 78 hours awake with 6 to 7 hours of sleep sprinkled around in there 4 12 hours in one solid block, the rest in 20-minute naps. Story 43 I once wrote out over 180 hours. The hallucinations are minor, akin to a very light dose of LSD, light took on a weird quality, and everything seemed odd and radiant. For me the biggest effects were mental. After around 80 hours people started to sound strange, and I found myself incoherent in an awful way. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, formulated the sentence in my head, but when I went to actually speak nothing but nonsense came out. It was horrible. Story 44 prior Coast Guard and it was hurricane season in the southeast US. Storms has knocked several hundred buoys off station, and we put out a notice to mariners saying so until we could fix it. Large tanker didn't bother to read the message and update charts. Steamed up the ICW and knocked out 700 buoys and 14 ranges large 50 to 250 wooden structures in the water with lights. Then recreational boaters ran aground all day and required towing rescue. Thus it begins. 7 weeks of 7-day work weeks and 16-hour work days. Small crew and standing duty had me eventually at 74 hours of no sleep. The last 12 hours were like a fog. Your mind is hazy slow. Every voice sound seems muffled, and you aren't aware of your own muscle movements. I set reminders on my phone to eat drink water as my body was too numb to feel the pressures of starvation dehydration. The hardest part is trying not to fall asleep in the 5 minutes you sit down to take a. When we finally pulled into Homeport and I got to rack out, I slept for damned near 26 hours. Waking up was worse. You know that feeling when you're sick and take NyQuil or any other PM drowsy drug and wake up? It was like that times 10, cotton mouth, confusion with my surroundings, splitting headache etc. 310, would not recommend, captains. Less hallucinations and more becoming convinced that I was becoming aware of some underlying subtext behind everything people said to me. Basically I was certain that I could discern the real emotional context behind the most mundane social interactions. Once I rested I realized I was full on delusional. Story 45. At the beginning of the summer I took 2 part-time jobs. One working early in the morning at a coffee shop and the other as a closer for a sandwich shop. Both places had beepers and noises that trained employees to know when a customer entered or an order came through. I wouldn't get a lot of sleep. I would wake up in the middle of the night to one of these noises and think I was at work in my underwear. Not fun, and had to quit one of them. Story 46. It was a recurring hallucination for about 6 nights. I was in high school and was going through a tough time, sleep deprived and with a lot of things to do. I would work on homework very late at night. For a week I saw a dark figure standing near my desk, and every night the figure became clearer and clearer until I realized it was a dead version of myself. I stopped seeing it after that. Story 47. Horrifying. I have nocturnal epilepsy and my seizures are triggered by lack of sleep. Thing is, my body will randomly just not let me sleep. I can dip into REM sleep for 15 minutes and then my body will slowly wake me up like I'd been out for 8 hours, rinse and repeat. The cycle will break with me having a seizure in one of those 15-minute sleeps. It takes me about a week to get to the point where I have a seizure. I would hear things, people's faces whom I knew would look weird, like I'd never seen them before and something just looked off. My coworkers would be talking to me and I'd just be staring at them trying to figure out why they looked wrong. It was like someone had made a not super precise replica and was trying to pass it off as an original. Anytime it was quiet the silence would be deafening. I could hear it ringing. Anytime there was white noise like a fan or humidifier I could hear voices, people laughing, having hushed conversations. The paranoia was the worst. Everything made me jump and I always felt like someone was watching me. I would be void of emotion most of the time, but at night I would cry and beg for sleep. Story 48. I've often had small hallucinations while tired if I've been up for 24 hours. Mostly just seeing human-like shapes in the trees dark if I'm not looking directly at something, or seeing movement out of the corner of my eye when nothing moved. I've had similar experiences back in my college days when I smoked a lot of pot. The shadow people are friendly, just curious. Story 49. I was seeing things that weren't there, but those things would always make sense, like I would look to the window and see my cat, then get close and I'd snap and realize nothing was there. Story 50. It's not very exciting. I just see spiders scuttling up the walls and floor in the corner of my eyes, sometimes cracks in the walls or shadow people in doorways. I know they're not real, so it's just annoying and wow, I really need to sleep. Story 51. A nurse came into the room I was working in and sat down. I started talking to her about a patient and then realized that the chair she sat down in was empty, so was the room. No one had come in residency. Story 52. These replies have made me realize how bad my sleep problems actually are. I've gone 3 or 4 nights with maybe 1 or 2 hours total sleep over those nights a couple of times a year for the past 3 or so years. Think I should get on top of that. Story 53. My ex-husband once hallucinated a Samoan man flexing in front of his car while driving home on a 10-hour trip in the middle of a California freeway at 2 a.m. Story 54. I once stayed up for close to 5 days, an hour or 2 nap every now and then, and boy, let me tell you, the most hallucinating part was a trail on anything I looked at. There were figures in my peripheral vision. Colors were too saturated. I could see outlines on things. The worst part though was the extremely heightened emotional state. One word could send me into a breakdown and the next, a laughing fit. Every inch of my body hurt. I do not recommend. Story 55. Spring break one year. I stayed up 5 days and on day 5 I was on stage for Little Shop of Horrors rehearsal and the auditorium seats had things sitting in them. People would appear and disappear in the shadows. It was trippy. Story 56. If this counts, but we were having a test on our physical and mental strength during our military service a month ago, of which one part was to walk for about 3 full days and nights with some breaks, not for sleep though. Started walking with my eyes closed after a while, and I can only explain it like I was sleeping while walking, with my legs doing their own thing, sometimes with my eyes open, sometimes with them closed. I fell in and out of dreaming the entire time, partly lucid for the first time ever. It was quite surreal, although to be fair I didn't have enough energy to truly experience it to its fullest. It included taking the bus home, food, getting shot at, food, the ground starting to disappear under our feet and us having to run the opposite direction, just giving up and wanting to sleep in a ditch that part may have been real, and food. Story 57. It only happened once, but boy was it enough for me. All-nighters back to back. Mine started as seeing things in the corner of my eye, making me think something was next to me or behind me at all times. I was in the passenger seat with a friend grabbing some Taco Bell at night and started seeing huge ants crawling on the side of the road. Got my food and went to sleep. After that my assignments were not worth that. Story 58. In the military. I deployed to an undisclosed location in the Middle East in mid-summer. I was up for 48 hours straight then landed. I rolled straight into a 12-hour shift in 130-degree weather changing out aircraft parts. I do not remember that shift still to this day. My brain was fried to the point where I could barely move let alone work. I would not recommend. Story 59. I've never actually hallucinated, but if I'm really tired I can see pictures in my head. Normally I can't visualize anything at all in pictures, only word descriptions, so it was actually really cool to be able to close my eyes and make my own movie. I'm pretty jealous of people who can actually picture things inside their head. I dream in pictures, so I don't know why I can't think in them. Story 60. Terrible. I was getting into rush HR traffic, but still doing about 55 to 60 miles per hour on narrow roads with sharp bends. GW Parkway going on to 295. For those who know it, I'd been fighting falling asleep cause I was 20 minutes away from work, and I couldn't simply pull over. Eventually, I knowingly started to lose that battle, but I was sure I could manage. I'd never fallen asleep at the wheel before or after, so I didn't know how wrong I was. I'm pretty sure I was sleeping with my eyes open, but quite sure the dreaming aspect of it was the hallucination. There was a black SUV in front of me with a spare tire hoisted on the back. All of a sudden, the tire transformed into a big black man in front of a grill who was trying to sell me burgers. It was exactly like those infomercials with an overly excited man selling you a product. He really wanted me to have a burger. I imagine I was out for about 5 seconds before I realized I'd been sleeping with my eyes open. I sincerely hope I wasn't out for longer than that. I'm so surprised, yet thankful that I maintained control of my car while driving so fast. My driving skills are immaculate defensive driver, but I don't know how I managed to turn on those bends while I was out. It was genuinely the scariest moment I'd had for a while. Story 61. It ain't fun. I tried going to bed but the hallucinations made it so I was uncomfortable in my room, so I grabbed my pillows, climbed out the window and went to sleep on the couch. Story 62. I get delusional thoughts, and I live my thoughts like they're happening, e.g., I think about boxing in a ring while sleep deprived and I imagine the whole thing while blankly staring in one of my morning classes. Story 63. 3 days sitting at Hold'em table at casino, cashed out winning a good sum, went to class 8 a.m., everything looked cloudy like mild fog, sounds were muffled, when I closed my eyes longer than normal, felt like dreaming and seeing color spirals like a rave light show. 2 friends asked me what was wrong with me while eating lunch. I just stared at them as they talked. And 2 more friends asked the same thing when I asked them, "What did you say?" in a completely empty class.